Okay, welcome everyone. Aloha. 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 That was pretty good. That's the first time I started like that, so I didn't know how it would go. I'm John. I am the recovery administrator for the County of Maui. I will be very short because we have a whole team of people that are going to come up and talk. Welcome. Thank you for your participation. It's awesome to see some familiar faces, and it's awesome to see some new faces. So this is the end of a week of workshop activity that we are really excited to share with you folks. We have, is the mayor here? Oh, he's in the back. He's going to come up later at the end of the presentation to say a few words. But the first person I'm going to bring up is our Deputy Managing Director, Aaron Wade. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to have everybody here tonight. Wanted to share a little bit about what we're doing and what's been happening through the week, so that to just set some context. So if you remember, during the long-term recovery plan, creating a rebuild plan for the commercial area was one of the primary objectives for this very first effort to be made. So we brought in a team. They're truly some of the best folks in the nation. They have a clean, they're looking at Lahaina with a fresh perspective, which has been helpful for us to look at new opportunities. So their job right now for this specific effort is to look at streets and connectivity throughout the district. So most of what you're going to see today is related to streets and connectivity. And we've also been getting lots of feedback on the build and rebuild of the neighborhood. So as this process moves forward, there's going to be additional opportunity to talk about what a rebuild actually looks like. To do that first, though, we have to know where the streets are. Thank you, Barry. Yeah, so anyway, working specifically on streets, we're hoping for a lot of your feedback tonight, but because the project's being managed by the Office of Recovery, I want to introduce Jen Maiden, who's been working directly with the team the whole time, and she's going to let you know who's here to talk with you tonight.
Mahalo, Aaron. I just first want to start out with a real big heartfelt gratitude to all of you for coming out this week, for coming out tonight, for coming out all last year for the workshops, the neighborhood workshops that we did for the long-term recovery plan. And I want to assure you that all of this work is building on itself together, gathering your voices, gathering your mana'o, your concerns, your ideas, all working towards helping you bring back the community. So there's not enough words to express the gratitude of all the effort and time that you all put into this. We know it's a lot. So it's been great being out here all week at the Resource Center, seeing you all working with our team. It's been very energizing, and I hope tonight gives you some really exciting ideas of how things perhaps could come back. So I'm honored to introduce the team that you all have met throughout the week that we've been working with. We have Stefan and his team with Opticos, focusing on the urban design. And Jeff Speck with his team from Spec Density, focusing on streets and mobility and connectivity. And Marcel Wilson with his team from Bionic. Landscape architects focusing on our public spaces, our open spaces, the shoreline. So I'm going to hand it off to Stefan to give an overview, and the team's going to walk through their ideas.
Thank you, Jen. Good evening. Aloha, everyone. Again, I'm Stefan. I'm an architect, an urban designer, and I come from Berkeley, California, and I'm very happy to be with all of you today. We had a chance to check in with about 250 people who stopped by the Recovery Center on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I see some of you are back here today, so I very much appreciate all of your time and help throughout this process. I'm going to get us started. I'm going to give you a little introduction to what we have been talking about this week and what we're doing. and then I'm going to hand the mic over to some of our colleagues who are going to take you through some of the components of our work that we'd like to share with you tonight. As Jen and Aaron mentioned, this is an important part of the rebuild process, but we are at the beginning of ours, so we are very much in the learning and listening process. I'm expecting that some things maybe we didn't get right yet, and so it's very important for us to get that feedback and have this conversation with you. As I mentioned, we also made a decision to do all of our outreach in person, but we know that many of the people in the community that need to provide input are not here on island with us. And so in the next few months, we're going to be ramping up online outreach as we prepare for an upcoming workshop later this year, and I will tell you a little bit more about that moving forward. So we're starting our process looking at the core of Lahaina town, and you can see there's a red boundary here that is around the area that we're looking at. The core of Front Street is at the heart of this project area, and we're looking at an area that goes all the way up to the highway, Mauka, but also Makai down to the Wharf and Harbor area, Makai of Front Street. On the north side, we're going up to Baker Street, and on the south side, to your right, we're going down to Prison Street. Thank you. And this is just to communicate that this effort that we're doing now is in coordination with many of the other rebuild and restoration efforts that are happening at the same time. There is a concurrent process that's looking at the Royal Complex. It's actually very exciting, and this process has kicked off this week. And I think, in fact, next Wednesday, the Department of OEB Cultural Resources will have an opportunity to introduce this project. But this is an exciting opportunity to restore many of the cultural components of the Royal Complex and think about the restoration of this area. And you can see that the two project areas kind of overlap and intersect at the wharf. So we're going to be coordinating with the group that will be looking at the Royal Complex over the coming months. I mentioned that we're at the beginning of our process. We actually started with an initial trip last month. We're here at the June Community Workshop. We're going to go through a process of testing, getting feedback from you all, and refining sort of our concepts. Between now and an additional workshop that will come back in September. And the goal is to get a phase 1 plan together very quickly by the end of the year. We're trying to go quickly because we know that a lot of people in the commercial core are wanting to rebuild. And one of the important things that they will need to rebuild is design guidance from the county in terms of what they should be expected to do. And that's an important part of our work here today. There's a phase 2 piece that will happen mostly next year. Is going to look at a larger portion of the Rebuild Lahaina Plan area, the area that was impacted by the fire. So we're doing an initial focus on the commercial core, and we will spread our boundaries out and look at those for phase 2 starting in December. I mentioned that we're here just to start testing ideas and testing design options as we learn. But the goal is by the end of the summer, when we come back in the fall, we'll start to work towards preferred design alternatives that can become components of the plan. The idea is that this is sort of a more concentrated, focused effort that's looking at a smaller area of the West Maui Community Plan, and it gives us an opportunity to dive deeper. One of the things that we can do here is provide some design guidance, because the documents that we have are there's not a lot of information. They don't give a lot of good content that provides guidance for setting expectations for what can happen. We understand that we're in a context where folks can rebuild. They have the opportunity to build back that with what was there before. But we also know that folks can make choices about making changes, and that there were portions of Lahaina that we know maybe weren't working as well as they could. And we've had an opportunity to sort of hear what some of those things are from all of you this week. So the planning process, we start with ideas and visioning, We put those out to you and we get feedback from what we heard and we try to make refinements. We're here at the beginning. The idea is that we'll sort of work towards some things where we actually are all finding agreement, and then where we find agreement and consensus, we'll put those things together into a plan. I mentioned that we had a chance to talk to over 250 people this week, and we tried to synthesize some of the common themes that we were hearing from folks when we were doing one-on-ones. Folks were leaving comments, some of the focus group meetings we had this week. And here's a summary of some of the items that sort of were resonating and repeating sort of across folks. A lot of interest in prioritizing pedestrians on front streets. For many folks, that meant thinking about a front street that actually might be closed to cars. We heard lots of different ideas around that. We heard that there is interest in making sure that all of the streets in the core of Lahaina town were safe for pedestrians and bicyclists. A lot of interest in what we would call universal access. That means that folks of all ages and abilities would be able to move freely throughout the town and not be hindered by barriers. We also heard a lot about protecting culture, history, and community spaces. We are still grappling with the gravity of the specialness of Lahaina town, of what all of you have, and it's actually very important for us to sort of hear from you, the pieces that are important and the pieces of that need to be preserved moving forward. A lot of opportunity here to start to connect some of those cultural sites together. Try to sort of understand how you can sort of freely walk and understand how these things actually work together in the community. We also heard a lot about what local character meant. Part of that is what the buildings look like and how they feel, but there also was a real interest in making sure that Lahaina town is a place that works for everybody. And what we heard this week, that meant that it was important that it also worked for locals in particular, because what we recognize is that a lot of the things that were working in Lahaina town, they no longer sort of had a lot of importance for the local community. And there's an opportunity to understand how we actually can improve on that. We heard about the need for public amenities, things like access to the water, or things like restrooms. Lots of concerns about sea level rise and environmental resistance, how to make sure that the town actually can be resilient to sort of future disasters. Also heard a lot about housing. That one of the ways that Lahaina town is maybe not working for the community is that it was actually very hard to live there. And so we want to see and understand where there are opportunities to not only think about capital A affordable housing that works for people who really need it, but also attainable housing that actually is that a greater portion of the population in the community is able to afford. Just some photos from this week. We had a chance to go out on site and visit some of the progress. As many of you know, the seawall is currently under improvements, and construction has begun on restoring and repairing the seawall. We also spent the last 3 days in the recovery center. It was really helpful for us to have these open houses in the afternoon where we had a chance to interact and touch base with many of you. So before I segue, I'm just going to sort of summarize the 3 things that I want to share with all of you tonight. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about mobility and connectivity and issues around the street network. Then we'll talk a little bit about open space and the shoreline and opportunities particular to those components. And then we'll talk a little bit about this idea of what might be happening on the private side with development, where folks are sort of building back, especially in the historic districts. So I'm going to introduce Jeff Speck from Speck MC, and he'll talk a little bit about item number 1. Thank you, Jeff.
Aloha. Well, I'm tremendously honored to be here tonight. I'm excited to be working with Opticos, which is Stefan's firm. and a firm that I've admired for many years. I'm Jeff Speck. I'm a partner in Speck Dempsey. With me tonight, I have Ben and Julia, who are each going to be introducing themselves to you individually. We were very excited and touched to be asked to participate in this effort. I've been coming to Maui since the 1990s. This is probably my 6th or 7th time here. I am from Boston, so it's a long way. But the first time I came to Maui, I stayed in Lahaina with my parents. And, to be asked to participate in this effort after being absolutely heartbroken from what happened a couple of years ago is a real honor. And honestly, we really hope that we can do it justice. We're doing our best. We specialize at Speck Dempsey in town planning, but especially in street network design. The design of individual streets and the design of entire downtown street networks. Big cities, medium cities, small towns. We redesigned the street network of Oklahoma City. It was fully rebuilt. Mobile, Alabama, they're doing right now. Small places like Ada, Michigan, or New Albany, Indiana. So we're familiar with the different scales of community. We love small towns. Probably most of us prefer spending time in small towns. In addressing the street network, I think we're approaching this with the same goals that you all have, which is to make Lahaina, again, as vital and lovely a place as it can be. So we've dedicated our practice to asking, what is the type of street network that causes that to happen? And that kind of took us down a rabbit hole that we've been digging in for 30 years about really the distinction between how you plan towns and villages and what's happened over the last 50, 60 years, which is how we plan, suburbs around the automobile. And so what you see in this image is a contrast between essentially the two different ways that communities get planned in America. The traditional way, on the right, a traditional neighborhood with a whole bunch of different activities in a nice network of small blocks. And then, of course, what you usually find on the edge of town, and usually on the edge of even the best towns, this concept of an automotive-based system, where instead of a network of small blocks, you have one major street, and then all these different big things that peel off it, creating an environment in which walking isn't useful and isn't pleasant. And when Ben waited today for a minute and a half to cross the street by the strip center to get to the Starbucks on the side where there was no tree, he had that experience of being in an environment that was designed around cars and not around people. In one of our meetings with some developers, or I should say landowners, who own properties in this neighborhood, we were looking at some of the organizations they were considering of their property, and I was trying to summarize very quickly what makes a great walkable and livable place, and I said, small blocks lined by friendly faces. If you can create a plan of small blocks lined by friendly faces, then you're going to make a place where people want to be. It's an interesting statistic that intersection density, right? How many intersections per square mile? How many blocks do you have in an area? Is a really strong correlation with how successful a place is and how walkable it is. So we go into the project with that understanding, and we also are concerned about connectivity. This is a page from some of the plans that were produced in response to the disaster in Lahaina. The idea of connectivity, not just to make a walkable place, but to make a safer place. And that the folks up at Kahua Camp who were stranded and the other challenges people had getting out were due principally to the lack of connectivity in the street network. And that deals with fire, but it also deals with issues like tsunami evacuation and any other time you want to get out of the neighborhood quickly. And so this idea of reconnecting the snipped streets and just having as porous and flexible a network as possible isn't just best for walkability, it's best for safety. And I would add, there's actually, if you can see my laser, there's 21 ways to get from this lower corner to this upper corner. So the network really provides that sort of flexibility that's safer as well. The other issue that came up in terms of connectivity it's certainly pedestrian connectivity, was the idea of pedestrianizing Front Street. And we're going to be talking about a whole range of options for what that might mean. As an advocate for walkable cities and walkable towns, I'm a huge fan of pedestrian streets. It's a bit of a challenge because about 210 streets in the US, retail streets, were pedestrianized in the 60s through the 80s. About 190 of them failed. The merchants went out of business. So we're very wary of what it means to pedestrianize the street. The main lesson isn't to not do it, but it's to do it in a way that's flexible. To do it in a way that if you're not successful, you can open it up again. To do it in a way with bollards, right, that allow you to have it open certain times and closed other times. But one thing we don't know, we're going to present a first concept tonight for how much of Front Street might be a more strictly pedestrian zone, but that's something we want to hear back from you about as well. We've certainly been hearing a lot from different folks who visit about their goals. I'm going to hand it now over to my colleague Ben Parker, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the street network.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you all for coming out tonight and sharing your time and your thoughts and your place with us. So this is a diagram of the existing street network in the Lahaina commercial core, with the Honoapi'ilani Highway in the back with 2 lanes going each way, Waimehe Street running the length of the site, Luakini Street running for part of the way through the site and then currently stopping, and then Front Street running along the waterfront. 4 main Mauka-Makai connections currently, with a few other partial connections. And as Jeff was saying, a street network with small blocks is really important for walkability. It also helps with traffic and also helps with safety. One of the things we've been exploring this week is extending Luakini Street all the way through to Baker. We think this would extend the character and activity of the core of Lahaina town, as well as help with the overall street network issues. We've been in conversations with community members who are stakeholders in these parcels and around, and they're open to and excited about this idea. Another important idea we are experimenting with is connecting as often as we can back to Honoapi'ilani Highway. We understand that because of the Lahaina bypass, this road eventually, not now and maybe not even soon, but eventually may be returned to a county road instead of being a state road. And this gives us a lot of opportunity in what we do with the road, especially if you're crossing from Mauka side down to Lahaina, and you're a pedestrian, maybe you park your car here or you walk down, or if you're a cyclist or anyone who's not in a car, crossing Honoapi'ilani Highway is very uncomfortable currently. And if we could make that pedestrian crossing more safe, more comfortable, it would do a lot to connect the commercial core to the rest of Lahaina. There are other opportunities where we think it makes sense to put cut-throughs. Obviously, that's a complicated thing that involves a lot of conversation, a lot of process, and a lot of learning. And not every one that we show would necessarily make it. But from the perspective of, we know that small blocks make great walkable places, we think it's worth exploring where you could possibly connect some of the street network, because some of these blocks are very long, and while there's good connectivity along the water, there's not as good connectivity back Mauka side. There's also existing pedestrian connections that existed. So on Front Street, if you parked in the back off of Luakini, there were these small pathways that you could walk and get out onto Front Street quickly. We think those are very important. And we think exploring opportunities where new pedestrian connections could be added is also extremely important and worthwhile when we have the opportunity to do so. So that's how we took what we've heard about the street network and what we've learned over the years and applied it to our initial studies. And Jeff is going to talk about one version, one possible version of what things could look like.
And I completed this little series of drawings right before we came over here tonight, but I wanted to to show you in a different way how this network could be stitched back together. So what you see here is the existing network, and Ben mentioned most of the streets, but just to orient yourself, the Foodland block is this very large block here, which we're proposing that Luakini cut through, as with the next block, which is the outlets of Maui. Again, and both of these, the owners of these sites are prepared to develop them fairly quickly, we believe. So you can see the opportunity to bring Luakini through that Ben mentioned. But there's lots of other opportunities. And so the difference between these two slides, and you can see that, for example, the Foodland block and the outlets block, essentially, this quarter, the quarter of this block is still a pretty big block when it comes to the sizes of blocks that you find in towns. So actually, it makes sense to break it up in the way that you see. So you see those blocks to the north, which is to the left, being broken up. You see the additional Malcolm Mackay connections that are coming through those blocks, extending all the way to the Hanoa Pi'imani highway. You see also additional streets that dead end, that almost reach the highway, that don't get there yet. You see this street here being extended through. As Ben said, these connections to the highway will be a long time coming, but we think it's important to put them in the plan so that as the plan evolves and when, as hoped for, but also expected, when the highway becomes available as a county road, the network can be completed. So essentially, that's the first thing you see happening. The second thing you see happening is the idea that up at the mill site, which you see here across the highway, that is at least tentatively planned as an ideal location for a transit center, for a multimodal hub. It's also a great place to get the tourists to park so they don't bother you with their cars in the heart of the city. The typical experience, and I've been part of this problem, arriving as a tourist, is you come into Lahaina and you just circle and clog up the street looking for one of those 8 little tiny lots that all the locals know about. Of course, the locals should be free to continue to park in those different lots, the people who live there, the people who work there. But we think that having some wayfinding, because if you're a tourist, actually, you just want a simple place to get out of your car. So having some wayfinding that very clearly directs everyone to one location, and this is the largest single spot that we've identified. It may not be the right spot, but this is the best intelligence we have at this moment, so this is our first proposal based on that. Which means that there's a burden when you do that to actually make a wonderful connection across the highway and bring people down Papalaua Street through here, down Papalaua to the beginning of the great pedestrian axis that is Front Street. So this move is essentially just keeping the tourist cars out of town and giving them a great way to get into town. Additionally, the West Maui Greenway, as you probably know, is planned to pass through this area. And it's the best way to bring people down that axis. So we're also imagining nice, protected, low-stress bike lanes. It so happens that Papalaua is if you know it, it's quite wide, right? It's the widest street in this part of town. It has more lanes than the traffic on it demands, or will ever demand. And so it can be cut back down to 2 lanes, and then you have room for lots of trees, for bike lanes, for pedestrian access. So that's that. Next, what we're showing is the idea of pedestrianizing at least part of Front Street. And what you have here is Lahaina Luna, so next to this proposed transit center. Lahaina Luna is a very important access point into the neighborhood. Next over is Dickinson, another good access into the neighborhood. Now, if you look down at the shoreline, you see that there's extended shore here where shops once were. There's also extended shore here as you get towards the wharf. But the place where Front Street is skinniest and tightest, and there's least opportunity for using it well, is between those 2 streets. So it really makes sense, as you see in yellow, to have kind of a loop where you come to the water and go. This is all two-way streets, but basically a loop to the water north on Lahaina Luna, and a loop to the water south on Dickinson. And then the idea that in between, and our landscape architects are going to show you some more detail of this, that the street between could be a pedestrian street. Finally, in this drawing, you see the green surrounding the highway. And this is, again, part of the dream about what this could be. But rather than having Lahaina split in half by a highway that is now effectively been replaced by a bypass, does it really need to be 5 lanes anymore? The car counts on it would suggest it does not need to be 5 lanes. And in fact, it currently is not 5 lanes. Because if you've driven on it today, it's actually just 1 lane in this direction. And it's functioning. So the idea there is that it could become a really special street. You have a lot of trees here that grow very quickly. And I understand in this part of the island they might require a little more water and a little more attention. But from someone who's not from here, the street trees that you have are just mind-blowing. And the idea that street trees can be placed between, not forcing you into the road, but between the sidewalk and the highway, creating a protection from the road, is something that excites us very much. So that's kind of the last move that we're recommending, and this then is our preliminary proposal. What I haven't talked about is changing the individual streets within the plan, and we don't want to see the character of Lahaina change. We don't want to see those streets become widened. We don't want to see them start to look like all the other streets in the rest of the island or the rest of America. However, every street that we visited presented some opportunity to make it a little more pedestrian friendly, a little more green, a little more walkable. So very quickly, Julia Lockman from my team is going to walk us through some of the proposals that we're making for these streets and the strategies that we're using to make them more walkable.
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia. Really honored to be here. And these are some representative street sections of the strategies that we're trying to work with so that we can make Lahaina town more walkable and more enjoyable to be as a pedestrian, biker, or a driver. So here's Holly Street. The existing right-of-way is 20 feet. And we put out here narrowing the driving lanes and adding an advisory lane so that cars can pass one another and dip into that advisory lane that is a shared space for pedestrians and bikers that is clearly delineated as a space that people can use in a shared way. Another strategy we use is taking driving lanes that are a little bit too wide and adding in a sidewalk so that people can walk alongside, narrowing the driving lanes within the existing right-of-way that already is there. Then also encouraging residents and businesses to add to the street canopy where there isn't space for street trees on the right-of-way owned by the county to make the walk more comfortable and interesting for pedestrians. Then we have Papalao Street, which represents a lot of the strategies that we're trying to work. As Jeff said, this is one of the widest streets in the center of Lahaina town. And so we wanted to narrow down these lanes, take out the turn lane because it's not necessary for the amount of traffic that is currently and projected to be on that road. Adding in sidewalks on both sides. Adding in plenty of street trees so that there is shade for people and also drainage for stormwater. And finally, adding in bike lanes so you can get that West Maui connection down Malcolm Makai into the center of Lahaina town. And then the Luakini Street extension, we picked out got a little messed up there, but we picked out 2 possible ways to orient this as we were talking with the businesses. On both sides, we want to have businesses facing the street so that people feel interested and safe on these streets. We have parallel parking as one option, and then we have angled parking as another option, which would have more street trees in between the different cars for parking options. And then options for the highway for in the deep future to make it more interesting and walkable and crossable for people to come into Lahaina town is to narrow it down from 5 lanes to 3 with a turn lane, adding in a parking lane, bringing pedestrians onto both sides, and then adding substantial street trees so that it's a more comfortable place to walk. So those are some of the preliminary strategies that we're proposing today, and we'd love to hear it.
Thank you, Julia. So that sums up our preliminary, and I stress preliminary thinking about both how the network would function and how the streets and roads within that network would function. A huge part of that is landscape, trees, and greenery. And I think it's time we bring up our landscape team. This is Marcel from Bionic, who will tell you more about that.
Good evening. My name is Marcel. I'm a landscape architect. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah. And I just want to echo everything that's been said about the honor and privilege it is to be here. Jeff was talking a lot about the network, the big picture. There's life happens between the streets. And so we've had an opportunity to talk to literally hundreds of people about just day-to-day life, what could make it better, what wasn't working, what was missing, and how could that be a part of Lahaina Town's future. You'll see hundreds of Post-it notes, lots of input, and I'll do my best to sort of summarize that. And one thing I really want to communicate is I'm going to show you drawings of things that we heard and try to put people's words on paper. It's not to say one's better than the other. This is a summary of what we heard and how does it look when we hold them up next to each other. So in the network of all of the streets, there's a whole series of connected places. These are your cultural sites, your public open spaces, and your streets. And when you combine them all together, you get an open space network. And one of the comments that we'll see back here is more public open space, more places to gather, and amenities. Well, it's crowded. Lahaina Town is crowded, and there's not a lot of available space. And so one of the concepts that you can sort of squint your eyes and start to see is that we're making use of the kind of the small, the medium, and the large to make sure public open space is distributed all the way across Lahaina Town, not just in one place or another. And then if you do that and you're strategic about it, there's the possibility of connecting these sites up into the sum of the parts is in the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think one of the things that we have heard calls for on many of the Post-its is connectedness. And if you connect the cultural sites and use streets and plazas and public spaces, you can get a continuous kind of space at the water's edge, which is something that's very human, and we're all drawn to kind of finding and reaching the water's edge. Another comment that you'll see a lot of is about Front Street. Closing Front Street, pedestrianizing Front Street, no cars on Front Street. And so we've really tried to put some shape around what that could possibly mean. So here's one set of opinions, which is that Front Street should have cars all up and down. And that's the way it was pre-fire. And so these red arrows indicate where cars could go. There's a different version which says that we're very confident about this piece in the middle, from Lahaina Luna to Dickinson, that might be a great place to have pedestrianized. And then cars could circulate around that on both sides of that. So that's another way to think about it. There's another version of a pedestrianized Front Street, which says maybe from Lahaina Luna all the way to the Royal Complex. That would be closed and pedestrianized. And I would just refer back to what Jeff said earlier about sometimes you can go too far, and you want to be able to design things to be flexible. And then there's another thought about pedestrianizing Front Street that says maybe from Lahaina Luna North, that part's vehicular. Lahaina Luna South, maybe up to the Royal Complex, that part's pedestrian. And then maybe when it gets into the Royal Complex, it goes away entirely. And that space really becomes something different. It represents a shift in the way you think about it, the way you interact with it, commands a different kind of respect. There's a whole team that's going to be studying that. But that's a different version of what a pedestrianized front street would mean. I think floating above this at 30,000 feet is a little bit abstract. It's kind of hard to put your head into it. So we zoomed in to the one part that we're really confident in, that pedestrian, a greater kind of pedestrian priority is probably a good idea. So when we talk about like pedestrianizing Front Street, we're talking about maybe it could be something like this. It feels more like a park or a plaza where pedestrians have the priority, where the materials are nicer and richer, where there aren't curbs, and you can walk free Mount Pitamakai without barriers. So imagine a pedestrianized Front Street that you might be talking about something like this. And so this is very washed out, I'm realizing. But here's two different ways you can think about it. So this is Front Street as a plaza. And what it contemplates is that I'm just going to point some dimensions out. Oh, here we're in Dickinson here, Lahaina Luna here. This section to about the curve in the road is 40 feet. And then when you make that curve and you go from the building face to the seawall, then you go out to 50 feet. So you have more room. And so what can you do with that extra space? And so what this drawing shows is a lane, one lane going down the middle. It would be one way going south. And it moves. It goes down the middle, and then it shifts to one side, and then it shifts to the other side. That slows cars down. And then when you do that, you make some bigger spaces where you could actually get some trees, and you could get some shade, and you could get some public gathering, and you can give the businesses some room to breathe. You could get dining out on the sidewalk. So a lot of possibilities when you start to use that street, not as a street, but as public open space. So this is Front Street as a plaza. Here we are zoomed in. You can see places for bike racks, places for benches, a wide 15-foot area to pass at all times, and this kind of shape of the road which keeps things nice and slow. And pave it with a beautiful stone, a local stone, black basalt, that would really change the mood of Front Street. Okay, that's one way to think about it. Another way to think about it is Front Street more as a park. That it's more free-flowing, that it's not so linear like a street, but it's kind of wandering and casual. Again, it changes the shape of the street, right, to kind of a flowing curve. You get wide spots and narrow spots, and you get room for planting and trees. So here we are kind of zoomed in. Places where, imagine, a Front Street where it never gets narrow or never gets narrower than 10 feet, right? That's almost double what's out there pre-fire. Or places where it swells to 25 feet wide, where you get trees, the right bench in the right place looking out to the view, and nice and slow. So these are a range of ideas. This is kind of what's possible when you start to think about Front Street as a public open space and not just as a road. Another set of comments was about views, how important those are, and then access to the water. And so this is a very simple idea, which says, don't build things in front of the street ends, and at every street end, have a way to get into the water, a way to access the water. And you can talk about that as a way of creating sort of equity or equitable access to the water all the way across Lahaina town. But you don't have to, if you're over here, you don't have to go all the way over here to get into the water. And so, very simple thing. But how would you do that? So here's an idea that says maybe access to the water at the end of the street is just a little stairway, and it allows you to get down there. That's not something that all abilities could do, but a lot more people could get to the water that way. Here's a version which says, well, if we want to get everybody to the water, maybe we have a little stairway and we have a ramp. But it takes more space, right? And you have to interact with the water. You have to interact with the edge. It's more complicated to do that. Or finally, maybe there's places where you want to even push out a little bit more. You get a stairway, you get a ramp down. And for people who can't do that, but they really, they want that water experience, maybe there's a place where you can kind of go out, leave the town behind. Maybe you can cast a fishing pole from that spot. And so different ways of creating water access could mean something quite, complicated or something very simple. And then another set of comments that you'll see over here is about the water itself and about the ecology of the reef. Today, and how can rebuilding make that better? Today, the water that hits the streets and buildings goes into pipes, picks up pollutants, picks up sand, maybe picks up oil, and goes right into the reef, right? Bad for the reef. And so building back better would mean intercepting that water, treating it, not letting it all go in there just as fast as we can get it there, and to deliver a better quality water to the reef. And that's a good start, and you start that by treating stormwater in the streets, where water lands. Other things that could then contribute to the health of the reef, stormwater management inland, thinking about ways to make the seawall ecologically productive, creating kind of niches for microscopic organisms, smaller organisms, shellfish, juvenile fish, right? That's the nursery to the larger reef. And then possibly even re-nourishing and reseeding the reef. And so it's a different kind of ethic about the way building back could think about the reef and the water. And you can imagine, this is something that scales up to the entire district. You scale the entire district, and you have to think about it this way. And what can you do when water lands here, on its way to the reef, the kind of water you release, the habitats we can create here, and then being good stewards of the reef in the future. So that's a summary of things that we heard and ideas we put on paper. And sometimes there's a lot of agreement. Sometimes there's a lot of different opinions. And the point of this process is to kind of keep creating those options and bringing them back to you and getting your feedback. With that, the next part is about rebuilding, and I'm going to pass this back to Stefan.
Hello again. How's everybody doing? Good? Okay. We've been here for a while. I'm going to try to close this out so that we have some more time to talk story after this. And I believe we also have an opportunity to hear from our mayor. So I talked about this idea of design guidelines, providing some guidance so that property owners have an understanding of what the expectations are for when they rebuild. And I'm just going to focus on 3 things that kind of resonate with some of the themes you heard tonight. The first one is making streets and blocks, particularly where blocks might be really big. The second one is just thinking a little bit about buildings and what makes buildings in Lahaina Town special. And then the last one is about the details, the different things of architecture that sort of made Lahaina Town so special. These are all things that we have an opportunity to think about and present in a really straightforward and objective way so that folks rebuilding have some clarity about what the expectations are. Jeff talked about this idea of making blocks out of the food land and outlets of Maui blocks. And this is just to show sort of some ideas for sort of what can emerge from that. Many of you maybe have the experience of parking in the food land lot or the outlets of Maui lot and finding your way down to Front Street and remembering sort of what that experience was like. Maybe it wasn't so great. Maybe it was hot. Maybe you were going through a part of town where there wasn't much ground to get to your destination. And so one of the ideas about connectivity is we can start to stitch some of those places together. And instead of walking through parking lots, you might be able to walk on streets under trees or under shade that feel a little bit more like Lahaina Town. So this just, we want to sort of understand if we have opportunities to reinforce that. And so this shows how buildings and open spaces, and we can think a little bit more carefully about how we arrange parking lots in that context. I do want to mention that one of the things that we heard here was that there was a need for community space in Lahaina town. That if you wanted to have a family get-together, if you wanted to rent a banquet hall, have a party, there was really no space available in the core of the community anywhere. And that the cinema space at Foodland had provided that opportunity, and what we understand is that that part of the building in particular it cannot be rebuilt. And so we thought, what if there was a community space in this part of town that was both approximate to Front Street, but could also sort of bring back some of those family-oriented activities. And so one of the special pieces of this is that the Luakini extension here, we thought that this would be a really great opportunity for a community open space on the inside of the block, adjacent to where Foodland is today, and that actually could be organized with maybe a banquet hall or a community space that can be both indoor and outdoor used for those kinds of opportunities. And then you could get right out to Front Street. This is, I think, the sort of Wahio Lane here that some of you might remember. And these drawings start to show some of the kind of character or concepts sort of behind that. The idea here is that you could see here's a rebuilt Foodland in the back of this structure on the left-hand side with an open space. Maybe there we have a stage set up for hula, and then on the left-hand side there could be some other sort of shops or eating spaces with this sort of rentable banquet space above. So that's one thing that we can think about. We can provide guidance to property owners about what we want to see on some of these parcels. I'm going to talk a little about building form. Really special and unique, different from a lot of spaces that we know. Parcels were really tiny. Buildings were actually really small. You could walk through town and you could pass an awful lot in a short period of time, and things were built close together. So we want to sort of understand what guidance we can provide so that Lahaina town sort of looks and feels a similar way, even though we know we're not going to build it back the same. The walls are going to be different. We need to use things that are fire resistant, but we still have an opportunity to build compactly. So this is this place where there isn't a lot of guidance in what the planning documents that county has, because there's never an expectation that there was going to be a lot of new building happening. It was all about making adjustments to the historic fabric that was still there. So we have an opportunity to think about how we can be sort of really objective and provide guidance for what we expect property owners to do. Two things that are in mind here, sort of the massing of buildings, but also how buildings orient to the street. We use the word frontage to describe what the face of the building is like and how it actually might relate to the sidewalk or the front yard in front of it, and we can provide some clear guidance for that. Lastly, I also want to touch on this idea of retail. And county staff actually shared these with us. These are documentation of some of the historic buildings. Many of you know this is Fleetwood's. But when we look at things back in history, we know that sometimes the building was built a certain way, and then later on maybe it was renovated, and the way it was renovated maybe was different from the way it was originally. And so even the building that you sort of might see today has a lot of modifications. So we have an opportunity to say, well, what should the architecture be like in the future? What are the details? If there's an overhang, how should we do it? We can provide some clear guidance so that property owners who actually might be rebuilding have a sense of sort of what the expectations are. This is another example where you can see the historic version on the left. Many years later, a lot of those historic pieces are no longer there, and you can see that a lot of things have been changed. So it raises this question, well, if we build it back, do we build it back just like this, or do we have an opportunity to think about maybe some of those historic elements that were nicer that we could sort of work with the property owner to bring back and potentially recreate? And here's some examples of how we can do that, right? With clear guidance, we can provide some drawings that show and set expectations for what folks are supposed to do, and we can sort of be clear and quantifiable to the maximum extent that we can. Okay, so we have said a lot tonight. Again, I really appreciate all of your time and energy. Just some reminders about what's coming next. There's going to be some online engagement that's actually going to be occurring over the summer. And then our team will be back sometime probably after Labor Day and to have a second phase of workshops where we can actually share additional information with all of you in more detail and start to think about sort of what's going to end up in the plan. And we're hoping to actually have phase 1 of this done actually by the end of this year. We know that a lot of folks are ready to rebuild, and we want to make sure that we can work in a time frame that works for everybody. So thank you very much for all your time.
Aloha, Lahaina, Ohana. Thank you folks for being here. The first thing I wanted to announce is if you could read any of those lines and letters from anywhere in the room, you will get your license renewed, your driver's license renewed automatically, because I know some of you folks were straining to see those, so you were just going with our speakers and what they were saying. So we will have better, drawings and things for you to see. But I also wanted to announce that, and I just saw them walk out, Bowers and Kubota is our design and engineering firm. They're our hire, and they have obviously have brought in these folks as our subcontractors, if that's the right word. So Bowers and Kubota, they're the largest engineering planning firm, design firm in the state. They have about 300 employees, and 20 of them are here on Maui. So I just wanted you to all know who we hired and who we went with. So in case you had any questions, I was going to introduce them, but they must have had to catch a flight, some of those folks that were here from Honolulu. I also wanted to share with you, there's one person back there in green. Is that the only person we have left from Bowers and Kubota? He works in the Honolulu office, but there's that in. Thank you guys for coming down. But they're from the Bowers and Kubota firm, so if you guys see them around, you're free to ask them any questions you have to about all of the process. What I really wanted to stress tonight is like any discussion you start, any voting, any input you give has to start with an initial concept. Culturally correct. I mean, there's so many boxes to check when you do something like this. And I just wanted you to help me thank all of these experts again for what they presented to us tonight. And it's hard enough for us to want to plan this big from here, but when you have folks that have crossed the ocean to come over and help us, and they're sort of taking, in some ways that neutrality is a good thing for us because they don't start with any preconceived notions. And so they come with expertise and with guidance, and again, trying to help us make our best decisions. So please understand that we'll go through a few more of these types of meetings, whether they're online or in person, so you can give your input. And for those of you who have friends and family and business owners who weren't here tonight, please pass on to them. I'm sure we'll give a website out pretty soon, unless it's mauirecovers.org. Is it that one?
Start there.
Okay, start at mauirecovers.org. What we are going to do now, though, is if you want to come and speak with some of our folks, they'll be around these concept drawings. So you're welcome to come up and ask more questions, or if you want to give input, we have more Post-its. So please feel free to do that as well. We still have some snacks too. But again, I just want to say thank you, like everybody else has, for always taking the time to come to our community meetings. Many of you are the folks that come all the time. We see some new faces because obviously we're switching to a different topic. All of these times we've been talking to our homeowners, our rebuilding, and tonight we're addressing a lot of the business community as well. We want you to know we see you, we value you, and we're in a better position now to help all of you.
What I mean by that is the funding that we received from the federal government just last week Friday makes us, that's good news. And some of that money will go to infrastructure, it'll go to economic revitalization and all the other things we're going to talk about next Wednesday. So that's the teaser to make you come back to next week. Is we're not going to tell you the whole thing tonight. No, you guys have already read about it, and you can find out more about it on MauiRecovers.org. But we're in a better position to actually make tangible strides with our business community and our business partners, and that's what we want to do. We've been engaging all this time with a lot of you, but the funds are now here for us to be able to put some of that, to implement and execute some of the stuff that we've talked about. We're not trying to rush it in, and we're not trying to go slow, you guys. We're trying to do it just right, and I know you'll let us know if we got it wrong. So please give us your input. That's all for tonight. Everybody drive home safely. God bless. Mahalo.